The moment Bryce Caldwell smirked at the Purple Heart pinned to the old man's chest, everyone in that courtroom knew something terrible was about to unfold. If you're ready to see arrogance meet its reckoning, hit that like button now. The air inside courtroom 7B felt heavier than usual that Tuesday morning. The wooden panels lining the walls seemed to absorb every whisper, every nervous cough, every shuffle of feet on the polished marble floor. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows in sharp, dusty beams, cutting through the shadows and illuminating particles that floated like tiny witnesses to what was about to transpire. At the bench sat Judge Elias Monroe, a man whose 67 years had carved wisdom into every line of his face. His silver hair was impeccably combed back, his black robe pressed and dignified. He hadn't spoken yet, but his presence alone commanded a silence so complete that the ticking of the courtroom clock sounded like thunder. To the left, seated with his shoulders slightly hunched, was Harold Jennings, 73 years old, wearing a threadbare suit that had clearly been his best once upon a time. The fabric was faded at the elbows, the tie slightly too wide for modern fashion, but everything about him was neat, respectful, and dignified despite his obvious poverty. On his lapel, catching the light every time he breathed, was a Purple Heart medal, the bronze patina speaking to decades of memory and sacrifice. His hands, weathered and scarred, rested gently on the table before him. His attorney, a young public defender named Sarah Chen, sat beside him with a stack of papers and an expression that mixed determination with barely concealed worry. To the right, slouched in his chair like he was sitting in his living room watching television, was Bryce Caldwell, 19 years old, wearing designer everything. Shoes that cost more than Harold's monthly rent, a watch that gleamed with aggressive opulence, jeans artfully torn in a way that cost $500 to achieve, and a hoodie bearing a luxury brand's logo in gold thread. His blonde hair was styled with calculated carelessness, and his face carried that peculiar expression of entitled boredom that only the truly spoiled could perfect. Beside him sat his attorney, Marcus Whitmore, a man in a suit that cost more than most people's cars, his silver cufflinks catching the light as he arranged papers with mechanical precision. Behind them, in the gallery, sat Bryce's mother, Victoria Caldwell, a woman whose cosmetic surgery and designer handbag collection had been featured in the society pages. Her lips pressed into a thin line of displeasure that her morning had been interrupted by something as mundane as her son's legal trouble. Judge Monroe's eyes moved slowly from one side of the courtroom to the other, reading everything, missing nothing. He picked up the file before him and opened it with deliberate care, reading in silence while the courtroom held its collective breath. "Mr. Caldwell," Judge Monroe's voice finally broke the silence, deep and measured, each syllable perfectly weighted. "You are here today because on the evening of March 15th, you were involved in an altercation with Mr. Harold Jennings that resulted in assault charges, destruction of property, and threats of violence. Do you understand the charges against you?" Bryce looked at his attorney, who nodded. Then Bryce turned back to the judge with that same infuriating smirk and said, "Yeah, I guess." Judge Monroe's eyes narrowed fractionally. "In my courtroom, Mr. Caldwell, you will answer with 'Yes, Your Honor,' or 'No, Your Honor.' We are not having a casual conversation. Do you understand?" Bryce rolled his eyes in a gesture so pronounced it was visible from the back of the courtroom. "Yes, Your Honor." The pause before the title dripped with sarcasm. A ripple of shock moved through the gallery. Judge Monroe set down his pen with a click that echoed like a gunshot. He leaned forward slightly, and when he spoke, his voice had dropped to a tone that was somehow quieter and yet infinitely more powerful. "Mr. Caldwell, I strongly suggest you adjust your attitude. This is not your parents' living room. This is a court of law, and you will show appropriate respect, or I will hold you in contempt." Am I making myself clear? Marcus Whitmore stood quickly, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your Honor, my client is understandably nervous. This is his first time in a courtroom. Perhaps we could proceed with testimony so we can resolve this matter efficiently. Sit down, Mr. Whitmore, Judge Monroe said without looking at him. The attorney sat. The judge's eyes never left Bryce. I asked you a question, Mr. Caldwell. Crystal clear, Bryce muttered, but he had at least dropped the smirk. Judge Monroe let the silence stretch for a long moment before finally nodding to Sarah Chen. Ms. Chen, you may call your first witness. The people call Harold Jennings, Your Honor. Harold rose slowly, his movements stiff with age and old injuries, and made his way to the witness stand. He was sworn in, his voice quiet but steady as he promised to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. When he sat, he folded his hands in his lap and waited, his eyes clear and honest. Sarah Chen approached gently. Mr. Jennings, can you tell the court what happened on the evening of March 15th? Harold took a breath, his voice carrying through the courtroom with a quietness that somehow demanded attention. I was walking home from the grocery store. I only live about 4 blocks from the Save Mart on Henderson Street. I had 2 bags of groceries, nothing heavy, just enough for the week. I'm on a fixed income, you see, so I budget carefully. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I was crossing at the corner of Henderson and 4th when I heard a car coming up fast behind me. Too fast. The speed limit there is 25 because it's residential and there's a school nearby. This car must have been going 50, maybe more. What happened next? The car came around the corner and clipped my leg. Not hard enough to knock me down completely, but hard enough that I stumbled and dropped my groceries. One of the bags split open and everything spilled into the street. I'm old, ma'am, and I've got a bad knee from... He paused, his hand unconsciously moving toward his chest, where the Purple Heart rested. From a long time ago. It takes me a while to get down and back up again. So I was there on my knees, trying to gather up my groceries before they rolled into the gutter or got run over. And what did the driver do? Harold's jaw tightened. The car stopped. Young man got out. He looked at me on the ground, looked at the groceries everywhere, and he laughed. He said, "Watch where you're going, old man. Maybe you should be in a home." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Victoria Caldwell shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I told him he was going too fast. Harold continued, his voice still steady. I said there's a school zone there, and he could hurt someone. And Harold's voice wavered for just a moment before steadying again. He walked over to where my groceries were and he kicked them. Deliberately, kicked the milk so it split open all over the street, stepped on the bread, crushed a carton of eggs under his heel while looking right at me. Did you respond? I told him he needed to grow up, that someone raised him better than that, or at least I hoped they had. How did Mr. Caldwell react? Harold's eyes moved to Bryce for the first time, and there was no anger there, only a deep sadness. He grabbed me by my jacket, lifted me halfway up. He's young and strong, and I'm old and not. He said, "You don't talk to me like that, you worthless piece of trash. Do you know who my father is? Do you know what I could do to you?" The courtroom was dead silent. Every eye was on Harold. "What did you say?" I said, "I don't care who your father is, son. You're acting like a punk." Harold's voice was still quiet, still dignified. "That's when he hit me." "He struck you?" "Yes, ma'am. Closed fist, right here." Harold touched his left cheekbone, where even now, weeks later, the shadow of a bruise was faintly visible. I fell down, hit the pavement pretty hard, and then he stood over me and he said... Harold paused, and for the first time his voice shook with emotion. He said, "Next time I see you, old man, I'll put you in the ground where you belong. You and whatever worthless life you think you lived." Sarah Chen let that statement hang in the air. What happened after that? A neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, from across the street. She saw it all from her window. She came running out with her phone, said she called the police. The young man got in his car and drove off. Mrs. Patterson helped me up, helped me gather what groceries were still salvageable, and waited with me until the police came. Thank you, Mr. Jennings. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Monroe nodded slowly. Mr. Whitmore, your witness. Marcus Whitmore stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced flair. He approached Harold with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Jennings, you testified that my client was driving approximately 50 miles per hour. How did you determine that speed? I didn't measure it, sir. I estimated based on, so you guessed. Objection, Your Honor. Badgering. Sarah Chen was on her feet. Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. Whitmore. Mr. Jennings, is it fair to say you cannot definitively state how fast the vehicle was traveling? I can say it was well over the speed limit, but you cannot provide an exact speed. No, sir. And you testified that Mr. Caldwell struck you. Were there any other witnesses to this alleged assault besides Mrs. Patterson? Not that I know of. So it's essentially your word against my client's? Harold's eyes hardened slightly. And Mrs. Patterson, sir, and the police photographs of my injuries, and the doctor's report from the emergency room. Whitmore's smile tightened. Mr. Jennings, you mentioned you're on a fixed income. You live alone, correct? Yes, sir. And you've had some difficulties making ends meet lately, haven't you? Sarah Chen shot to her feet. Objection. Relevance? Whitmore turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'm establishing potential motivation for exaggerating the incident. Judge Monroe's eyes had gone cold. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Counselor. Mr. Jennings, Whitmore continued, isn't it true that you could benefit financially from a civil suit against my client's family? For the first time, Harold looked genuinely hurt. His voice when he answered was quiet but firm. Sir, I'm not suing anyone. I just want justice for what happened. I want that young man to understand that he can't treat people that way. But you wouldn't say no to a settlement, would you? I'm not here for money. That wasn't my question. Judge Monroe's voice cut through the exchange like a blade. Mr. Whitmore, I believe Mr. Jennings has answered your question. Move on. Whitmore paused, then shifted tactics. Mr. Jennings, I notice you're wearing a Purple Heart. That's a military decoration, correct? Yes, sir. Vietnam, 1969. And you're proud of your service? I served my country, sir. I did my duty. Must be difficult, though, coming home from war, trying to readjust to civilian life. Some veterans struggle with anger, with PTSD. Do you have PTSD, Mr. Jennings? The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Sarah Chen was shouting her objection, but Harold's voice cut through everything, suddenly strong and clear. How dare you? Judge Monroe's gavel cracked like lightning. Order, Mr. Whitmore, in my chambers now. Miss Chen, you as well. We're in recess for 15 minutes. He stood, his face a mask of barely controlled fury, and disappeared through the door behind the bench. The moments that followed felt frozen. Harold sat in the witness box, his hands trembling slightly, that Purple Heart catching the light. Bryce was whispering something to his mother, and from the gallery someone could hear him say, "This is such a waste of time. The old guy probably had it coming." When court resumed, Judge Monroe's expression was carved from stone. Marcus Whitmore returned to his seat, his face slightly pale. Sarah Chen looked grimly satisfied. "Mr. Whitmore," Judge Monroe said, his voice deadly calm, "your line of questioning regarding Mr. Jennings' mental health and potential PTSD was inappropriate, irrelevant, and borderline sanctionable. If you attempt anything similar again, you will be held in contempt. Are we clear?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you have any further questions for this witness?" "No, Your Honor." "Then sit down." Judge Monroe turned to Harold. "Mr. Jennings, you are excused. Please remain available for potential recall." Harold nodded and made his way carefully back to his seat. As he passed Bryce's table, the young man muttered just loud enough to be heard, "Stolen valor, probably. Half these old guys fake their medals." Time seemed to stop. Harold stopped walking. Sarah Chen's eyes went wide. Marcus Whitmore grabbed Bryce's arm, hissing something urgent, but it was too late. Judge Monroe rose slowly from his chair, and when he spoke, his voice filled every corner of that courtroom with the weight of absolute authority. "What did you just say?" Bryce looked up, and for the first time, a flicker of real fear crossed his face. "I didn't stand up when I'm addressing you." The judge's voice hadn't gotten louder, but it had somehow become exponentially more powerful. Bryce scrambled to his feet. "I asked you a question, Mr. Caldwell. What did you just say about Mr. Jennings?" Bryce's mouth opened and closed. His attorney was pulling at his sleeve, trying to make him sit, but the judge's eyes had pinned him in place. I said, "Look, I just meant that you accused a decorated veteran of stolen valor in my courtroom while he is testifying about your assault against him." Judge Monroe's words fell like hammers. "Ms. Chen, please call your next witness." Sarah Chen stood, her voice clear and strong. "The people call Mrs. Eleanor Patterson." An elderly woman made her way to the stand, her white hair in a neat bun, her dress simple but dignified. She was sworn in and sat with her purse in her lap. Under Sarah's gentle questioning, Mrs. Patterson corroborated everything Harold had said. She had seen the car speeding, seen it clip Harold, seen Bryce emerge and mock him, destroy his groceries, and finally strike him. Her voice shook when she described watching Harold fall to the pavement. "I've known Harold for 15 years, she said. "He's the kindest man. He helps me carry my groceries when my arthritis is bad. He volunteers at the VA hospital every Thursday. He's never bothered anyone. What that boy did was evil, pure evil." When Whitmore tried to cross-examine, suggesting her eyesight might not be reliable given her age, Judge Monroe shut it down immediately. "Counsel, I'm warning you once more about this line of attack. Ms. Patterson wears glasses, which she has on. Her testimony has been clear and consistent. Move on or sit down." Whitmore sat down. The prosecution rested. When it came time for the defense, Marcus Whitmore stood and called Bryce to the stand. It was a calculated risk, and it would prove to be a catastrophic one. Bryce took the stand with some of his earlier bravado returning. Whitmore led him through a carefully scripted version of events, where Harold had stepped in front of the car, where Bryce had stopped to help, where Harold had become belligerent and aggressive, where Bryce had merely defended himself from a confused old man who might not have known where he was. It was smooth, practiced, and completely unconvincing to anyone who had heard the previous testimony. Then Sarah Chen stood for cross-examination, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Mr. Caldwell," she began, her voice cordial, "you testified that Mr. Jennings stepped in front of your car. How far away were you when he began to cross?" "I don't know, maybe half a block." "Half a block? And you couldn't stop in time?" "He came out of nowhere, from the sidewalk, where pedestrians typically are." Bryce's jaw tightened. "I guess. You testified that you stopped to help him. Is that correct?" "Yeah. But Mr. Jennings testified, and Mrs. Patterson confirmed, that you laughed at him when he fell. Did you laugh, Mr. Caldwell?" "Maybe. I laugh when I'm nervous." "You laugh when you're nervous. Do you also destroy people's groceries when you're nervous? Kick containers of milk? Step on bread? Crush eggs?" "I don't remember that." "You don't remember, but you do remember that Mr. Jennings became belligerent." "Yeah. He started yelling at me." "What did he yell?" "That I was driving too fast, that I was a punk, stuff like that." "And that made you angry?" "I mean, yeah, some old guy screaming at me for no reason. That's annoying." "So annoying that you grabbed him by his jacket?" Bryce hesitated. "He was in my face. He's 73 years old with a bad knee, and you're 19 and athletic. Was he truly threatening to you?" "I felt threatened." "Did you strike him?" "I pushed him. He fell because he's old and unsteady." "You pushed a 73-year-old veteran hard enough that he fell and sustained visible injuries to his face." "It was barely a tap that left bruises documented by a hospital. People that age bruise easily." Sarah Chen walked back to her table and picked up a piece of paper. "Mr. Caldwell, do you recognize this?" "I can't see it from here." She approached and showed it to him. "This is a screenshot from your Instagram account, posted 4 hours after the incident with Mr. Jennings. Can you read the caption for the court?" Bryce's face went pale. That's not..." "Read it, please." "Just taught some boomer a lesson about respect. Old people need to learn their place." And then some laughing emojis. His voice had gone flat. The courtroom erupted. Victoria Caldwell put her face in her hands. Marcus Whitmore looked like he wanted to disappear into his seat. Judge Monroe's gavel rang out once, and silence returned as if cut by a knife. His eyes were locked on Bryce with an intensity that was almost physical. Sarah Chen wasn't done. You posted that about assaulting an elderly veteran. You were proud of it. I was just joking. It's social media. Nobody takes that seriously. Mr. Jennings has injuries. Mrs. Patterson witnessed an assault. The police documented everything. But you were joking. I didn't mean... You also posted in the comments when someone asked if you were serious. And I quote, dead serious. These old worthless people think they can talk down to me. My dad could buy and sell him 1,000 times over. That Purple Heart doesn't mean anything anymore. It's just stolen valor anyway. Did you write that, Mr. Caldwell? The silence that followed was absolute. Even Bryce seemed to realize he had crossed a line from which there was no return. Answer the question, Judge Monroe said quietly. Yeah, I wrote it. But I was angry and... No further questions, Your Honor. Sarah Chen returned to her seat. Judge Monroe gestured to Whitmore. Redirect? The attorney stood, paused, and then said, No, Your Honor. Then the witness is excused. Mr. Caldwell, return to your seat. Judge Monroe waited until Bryce had stumbled back to the defense table. Does the defense wish to call any other witnesses? No, Your Honor. The defense rests. Closing arguments. Both attorneys delivered their summations, but they felt like formalities. The truth of what had happened was obvious to everyone in that courtroom. When they finished, Judge Monroe sat back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and surveyed the courtroom. The silence stretched. A full minute passed. Then another. The tension was unbearable. Finally, the judge leaned forward. Mr. Caldwell, stand. Bryce stood on shaking legs. All of his arrogance had evaporated, leaving only a scared teenager who had finally realized he was not, in fact, untouchable. Mr. Caldwell, in 38 years on the bench, I have seen many things. I have seen people at their worst and occasionally at their best. I have seen genuine remorse, and I have seen calculated manipulation. What I have witnessed today, however, stands out even in that extensive experience. Judge Monroe's voice was measured, but every word landed with devastating precision. You assaulted a 73-year-old man who served this country with distinction. When he was on the ground, vulnerable and injured, you mocked him. You destroyed his property. You threatened his life. And then, astoundingly, you bragged about it on social media, where you not only celebrated your actions, but also disparaged his military service that cost him blood and sacrifice while you were not even born yet. Bryce was crying now, tears streaming down his face. Your Honor, I'm sorry. I didn't mean... Be silent. The two words were spoken softly, but Bryce's mouth snapped shut as if on wires. You have shown no remorse until this moment, when you finally realize there will be consequences for your actions. That is not genuine contrition. That is fear. And frankly, Mr. Caldwell, you should be afraid, not of me, but of what you have become. Judge Monroe picked up his pen and wrote something on the papers before him. You are found guilty of assault in the 3rd degree, destruction of property, and making criminal threats. I am sentencing you as follows: 6 months in county jail, with no possibility of early release. 1,000 hours of community service to be performed at the Veterans Affairs Hospital, where you will work under the supervision of the very men and women whose service you denigrated. You will attend anger management courses and write a 5,000-word essay on the meaning of respect, humility, and service, which you will read aloud at the VA hospital in front of the veteran community. Victoria Caldwell gasped. Whitmore was on his feet. Your Honor, my client is a first-time offender. 6 months in jail is less than what he deserves. Judge Monroe cut him off. But it is what the law allows me to impose. Your client's actions were not those of someone making a simple mistake, Counselor. They were the actions of someone who believes himself above accountability. That ends today. The judge turned back to Bryce. Furthermore, you will write a formal letter of apology to Mr. Jennings, which you will deliver in person, and you will pay for every item of his that you destroyed, plus medical expenses, plus pain and suffering. The amount of restitution will be determined in a separate hearing, but I assure you it will be substantial. Bryce was openly sobbing now. Please, Your Honor. Please, I'll lose my college admission. I'll lose everything. Judge Monroe's expression didn't soften. Mr. Jennings could have lost his life because of your recklessness. He lost his sense of safety in his own neighborhood. He was humiliated and injured. What you might lose in consequence of your own choices pales in comparison. He paused. However, I want to say something to you, Mr. Caldwell, and I want you to listen carefully, because this may be the most important thing anyone ever tells you. The courtroom leaned forward collectively. You are not beyond redemption. You are young, and though your actions were reprehensible, you still have the capacity to grow, to change, to become a person of character and integrity. But that change will only happen if you face real consequences and do real work on yourself. Your parents' money cannot buy you out of this. Your privilege ends here. What happens next is entirely up to you. You can emerge from this experience bitter and unchanged, or you can emerge as someone better, someone who understands that every person, regardless of age or status or wealth, deserves basic human dignity, someone who understands that service and sacrifice merit respect, not mockery. Judge Monroe's eyes moved to Harold, who sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, tears running silently down his weathered face. Mr. Jennings, would you stand, please? Harold rose carefully, leaning slightly on the table for support. Sir, I want to apologize to you on behalf of this court and this community. What happened to you should never have happened. Your service to this nation, your dignity in the face of disrespect, and your courage in coming forward to testify are all worthy of the highest commendation. This court thanks you for your service, both in uniform and as a citizen today. The judge did something then that stunned everyone present. He stood, and with slow deliberation, he came down from the bench. He walked across the courtroom floor, his robes sweeping behind him until he stood directly in front of Harold Jennings. And then Judge Elias Monroe, who had never in his career broken protocol in such a manner, came to attention and saluted. The entire courtroom rose to its feet. Some of the spectators were in tears. Even the bailiff, a former Marine, snapped to attention and saluted. Harold, his eyes streaming, returned the salute with a hand that shook but remained steady. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Monroe held the salute for a long moment, then lowered his hand and returned to the bench. This court is adjourned. Bailiff, take Mr. Caldwell into custody. As the bailiff approached Bryce with handcuffs, the reality of the situation finally, fully crashed down on the young man. His mother was wailing. His attorney was already on his phone, presumably calling someone about an appeal. But none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was that justice, real justice, had been served. As Harold gathered his few belongings and prepared to leave, several people from the gallery approached him, shaking his hand, thanking him. An older woman, wearing a gold star mother's pin, embraced him gently. A young man in an army uniform stood at attention and saluted him. Harold accepted it all with quiet grace, still processing what had just happened. Before he left the courtroom, Harold paused and looked back one time. Bryce was being led away in handcuffs, his head down, his designer clothes and expensive watch suddenly looking ridiculous in that context. Harold's expression was not triumphant or vindictive. It was simply sad. Sad that it had come to this, sad that someone so young had strayed so far. But there was also something else in his eyes. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be the turning point for Bryce Caldwell, that the boy would use his time to reflect, to grow, to become better. Judge Monroe watched it all from the bench, his own expression unreadable. He had delivered thousands of sentences in his career, but this one would stay with him. Not because of its severity, but because of what it represented. A stand against the corrosive belief that wealth and privilege placed anyone above the law or above basic human decency. As the courtroom slowly emptied, the afternoon sun continued to stream through those tall windows, illuminating the scales of justice embossed on the wall behind the bench. The scales were balanced. For today, at least, the system had worked exactly as it should. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about accountability, consequence, and the unwavering principle that all people, regardless of their station in life, deserve dignity and respect. Harold Jennings deserved better than what Bryce Caldwell gave him that night on Henderson Street, and Bryce Caldwell deserved to learn, truly learn, that his actions have consequences. If this story moved you, if you believe in real justice for those who serve and sacrifice, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and comment "Justice for All" below. Let's build a community that stands against arrogance and stands for what's right. And tell us where you're watching from, because justice matters everywhere, and every voice in support of it counts.